Hello everyone, my name is Manolis Sfinarolakis, the founder and producer of Reality Crowd TV, and welcome to a special episode of our show entitled Real Estate Crowdfunding, Global Real Estate with Funding Platform Wealth Migrate. We have a wonderful show today, but before I introduce our two esteemed guests, I'd like to tell the audience a little bit about how this works. During the live broadcast, if you're watching on Google+, there is a question and answer application that if you're watching through the Google+ event, you'll be able to submit any questions that you have for the guests or anyone on the show. Additionally, if you can't watch the whole episode, this episode will be archived on YouTube so that you can come back to the event page and replay the actual event for further viewing. Again, we encourage anyone to ask questions as we would like this to be interactive, and I just want to thank you as the audience for joining us today. So without further ado, I would love to introduce our two guests. We have Dolf de Roos, Dr. Dolf de Roos, the president of Wealth Migrate. And Dolf, would you please introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure, Manolis, thank you so much. Thanks for the opportunity. You know, I've been involved in real estate probably for way too long. It's over 3 decades. I've ended up sharing what I do. I've written 15 books on the subject. I've taught in 26 countries. And the thing to take away from that, I guess, is that I'm passionate about it. I live, breathe, eat, and sleep real estate. I still believe with a passion that it is singularly the best way for the average person to gain a sizable fortune, to do really well, to retire and live a lifestyle that he wants to lead. I think it's far easier to do with real estate than just about any other investment vehicle out there for reasons that I'm happy to share and I devote big chunks of my books to. And I think if you have passion about anything, it's far easier to succeed than if you do it because it's your job or you have to or your boss tells you to. So I've been very blessed. I've worked with a number of notable people. I was working with Rich Dad for a while. I wrote the book in the Rich Dad series. I've taught at Tony Robbins' Wealth Mastery. I've worked with Donald Trump at Trump University. And so, I mean, this is what I do. So I love being here and being on your show. And thank you again for the opportunity.
Dolf, again, it's a pleasure to have you and your excellent real estate mind on this show. I mean, you're a wealth of information, and to be involved in Wealth Migrate and bringing that to that platform, that is an amazing asset. So thank you for joining us as well. And of course, we have Scott Picken, the founder and CEO of Wealth Migrate, the visionary behind the platform. And Scott, would you please introduce yourself to the audience?
Manolis, thank you very much, and to all of you out there, it's a pleasure. Dolf, I know that, or Dr. Dolf de Roos, I know that you're in America. I'm coming live to you from Bali, so we really are in all different quadrants of the world. It's nearly 11 p.m. here at night. I think in simple terms, from my perspective, property or real estate is something that I've always loved and been passionate about. I read Dr. Dolf de Roos' book, Real Estate Riches, at the age of 19, went out and did my first project at 19, but forgot that didn't know that you had to get planning permission, so that wasn't my most successful one to date. But we went on and got started, went to London when I was 22, did my first development at 22, and then bought my first house in London when I was 24. I've always been passionate about international property, international real estate. You know, I believe a lot in not just having all my eggs in one basket and being able to take advantage of the best opportunities. And we started a company when I was 26 years old called International Property Solutions, and in simple terms, we've helped over 2,200 investors invest around the world between the UK, Australia, America, and South Africa. And really, from a Wealth Migrate perspective, crowdfunding is something that I'm deeply passionate about. I actually wrote my dissertation on it in 1998, believe it or not. True, I didn't use the word crowdfunding, but I did do an entire dissertation on how IT was going to revolutionize the property or real estate industry. And I think it's amazing that 16 years later, there's been this combination of technology, the change in psychology from people, and then obviously legislation that's empowering people to take advantage and get access to the best opportunities globally and also the best partners. So it's exciting to be able to share it with everyone and to enjoy the journey.
Absolutely, and again, it's quite the pleasure to have you, Scott. And it's amazing that back in 1998 you kind of forecasted what was to come, and now finally the world is ready for it. So this is definitely an exciting time for the audience. Just to kind of break it down for the audience, Scott, could you essentially explain what equity crowdfunding is?
I will. Just one thing that I forgot to mention there. I also this year launched the book Property Going Global, which really was trying to explain to people, why one would look at America over Poland or Australia over Tunisia, as an example. We've effectively got a model to be able to help people make systematic and scientific decisions as to where they should invest. Now, when it comes to equity crowdfunding, why that is important and what is exciting about that is that if one takes Kickstarter and the coolest cooler, and if you haven't gone and watched that video, I'd highly recommend it. But really, when you take something like Kickstarter, they raised $14 million. They had something like 460,000 people pledge. But at the end of the day, I was buying a cool box, and although I'll probably get my cool box, I don't buy shares in the coolest cooler because that's what I would actually prefer to have. Is because I think without a shadow of a doubt, it's going to be a successful company because I'm telling people about it in Bali today. What equity crowdfunding allows you to do is and it changed in America from September last year, September the 30th, where I could now participate and buy shares in that company. So rather than just wanting their product, whether it was a cool box or a watch or something else, or possibly donating money to a charity or my mate who's going for a run or anything along those lines, what equity crowdfunding allows us to do is actually to participate in the company. Now, in real estate, it becomes that much more obvious because, a lot of us aren't venture capitalists. A lot of us don't understand how to value companies. A lot of us don't understand whether one company will be better or worse than another company. But real estate is something tangible. We do understand that. We've got a lot of common sense. And so we can look at properties, be it a house, be it a bigger building, and we can say, well, I'd like to buy a piece of that building. And really equity crowdfunding allows you to participate and own a piece of either a company or a building, and then ultimately generate all the income that's due to you down the line, as well as any capital growth, or it very much as if you own a property 100% on your own.
Absolutely, and that's the revolutionary piece, because you explained it perfectly by giving the model that most people are familiar with, the contribution in exchange for a reward model, which is Kickstarter and Indiegogo. Now it's actually contribution in exchange for a share of the property, or actually loaning that company debt and earning a return on the interest rate. So equity crowdfunding is revolutionizing the way things are done, not only in the U.S., but globally, which brings us to Wealth Migrate. Wealth Migrate is unique from my understanding of the research that I've done with multiple platforms that we've interviewed, in the fact that you're global. It's not just happening in the U.S., the equity crowdfunding movement, but countries around the world are beginning to embrace this concept as a way to democratize finance. So Dolf, would you give us a little bit of an insight as to how this is happening globally? What have you seen from the global perspective that is looking like they're embracing this global equity crowdfunding movement?
Well, sure, Manolis. It's very interesting because many people like the catchphrase "going global." Go global but think local, or whatever. Invest locally but think globally. Few people are doing it, especially here in the States. I'm always astounded at the relatively low proportion of Americans who even have a passport. It's something like 17%. Only 5% leave the country in any 1 year. Just about every investor in the United States has 100% of their investments denominated in US dollars and invested in the US. And there's nothing right or wrong with that, but inevitably in this country, a lot of people feel that if you should even think of investing overseas, you're being seditious to your own country. And the truth, of course, is far from that. The truth is those countries that have a high propensity of their citizens investing overseas, they end up bringing money in the form of rental income or dividend income back to their own country. So we are, I believe, at the front end of that trend. I believe that within a generation, everyone will think so globally. In fact, the concept of nation states will probably start to disappear. Just like in Europe, we now have the EU, and despite rumblings about some countries trying to leave, like the UK, and we've now got essentially one nation called the European Union, which has one currency instead of all these different currencies that they used to have, the German mark and the French franc and the Dutch guilder and the Belgian franc and all that sort of thing. And so we're becoming more global by nature, and we're just one of the first to do so. Another aspect I'd just like to slip in here that sets equity crowdfunding apart from traditional ways of doing is prior to crowdfunding, it was, of course, entirely possible to buy a slice of a property and get a slice of the revenue. But the difficulty was that governments all over the world put in regulations essentially to stop fraudsters and bad people from taking advantage of innocent people. So, for instance, most countries have a rule through various bodies in the States. In many countries, it's known as the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission. In Australia, it's ASIC, and in Singapore, it's MAS. They all have different names, but essentially, they're charged with the same concept, and that is to make sure that it's a safe environment for people to invest in. Well, a result of that is that usually they would limit the number of investors that could take part to 25, and you had to have a prior relationship with them. And these investors had to be accredited. It's a fancy word, and the definition varies country by country, but in the United States, for instance, you had to have a net asset base of $1 million, an annual income of $200,000 a year before you could invest. Well, they were very successful, these government bodies, in keeping a large proportion of the fraudsters out, but by a mere dint of this set of regulations, they prevented the mom and pop investors, the average person, from investing. So when governments saw the absolute astounding success of companies like Kickstarter and Indiegogo, and how they could get thousands, tens of thousands of investors on board, and how successful it was, they decided to liberalize the rules. And the United States wasn't even at the cutting edge of this. I believe the US was the 10th country to adopt these new rules. And we're still going through a process. It's not black and white from one day to the next, suddenly it's possible. It's a steady process. It's going to take 2 or 3 years for the whole regulation group to change. But essentially, thousands of people can now take part and have, a stake of whatever the company decides. Maybe a minimum investment of $10,000 or even $1,000 on Kickstarter. You can sometimes get away with putting $1 in. And this is good because it frees the market up. But to get back to your question, what sets Wealth Migrate apart is that unlike just about every other crowdfunder that I know, they are all very country specific. So the ones based in the US tend to advertise in the US, they tend to invest in the US, and they tend to promote their investments to investors in the US. Wealth Migrate is truly global. We're global on many levels. We're global by mere dint of the people involved. We've all got different nationalities and backgrounds, and we are based in different locations. And as Scott mentioned, we're even completing this call from 2 geographically disparate regions. But more importantly than that, we invest all over the world. We've got a track record amongst those of us, on the board and on the, in the directors camp, of having invested on 5 continents. And it's not just 1 or 2 properties. We've got thousands and thousands of properties collectively between us under our belts. So we are truly global, and this is going to be a trend. Just like in the EU, you can now, freely work and invest all over the EU if you're a citizen there. We're going to bring this to the world, I believe, and I think with the benefit of future hindsight, this is going to be seen as a very smart move, one that others will follow. We're not the only ones who can do this, but we're certainly ahead of the pack when it comes to investing on a truly global scale.
Wonderful, Dolphin. I'm actually very grateful that you ended up sharing the fact of the accredited investor standards, because right now the audience might be thinking, so right now I can actually personally invest in a property through Wealth Migrate. Well, if you're US based, the accredited investor standard still stands, but the only change that was made back in September, as Scott mentioned, when the Securities and Exchange Commission implemented a provision in the Jobs Act, you still have to be an accredited investor, but now you're allowed to generally solicit people that you didn't have a prior relationship with. What I think a lot of people are getting excited for, and unfortunately there's still delays here in the US, and I know outward in the world there is some regulation still pending, but what people are excited for is when the time comes when anyone, regardless of income, will be able to invest in a real estate property. Unfortunately, in the US, that isn't the case at the moment, but globally there are some interesting trends that are occurring. Before we hit that global trend, though, I actually would like to talk. Yes, sir.
Can I just say something on that? I do think one thing to add to what Dolf said that's really important is that a lot of people think that buying a property or investing in real estate is just about the property. And I tend to say to people it's only 20%. The other 80% is what structure do you hold it in? Your tax, your compliance, your management, your maintenance. What's the ongoing part? And whether that property is literally just down the road from where you live, or whether that property is on the other side of the planet, you need to be able to understand that. And I think really one of the things that we bring to the table is not just the understanding of the international property market, and not just the understanding of how technology can take advantage or certainly enhance that, but really with trial and error is probably the only way to describe it, is that over years and years of experience and helping thousands of clients, we figured out the ways to be able to open a bank account. So, it's all good and well to say that, in Malaysia right now, where Dr. de Roos was talking, literally less than a month ago, there were 2,700 people in the room, that were so engaged, and all they wanted to do was learn from him and learn about his knowledge with real estate investing. And they were desperately keen when he asked, and he said, put up your hands if you're interested in actually investing with me. So not just learning from me, but invest with me, which is really where crowdfunding is going. And I mean, the exciting thing is that country is about to drop all legislation with regards to accredited investors. But my point being is that there's a whole bunch of frameworks that people need to understand. And again, it's not just as simple as, oh, that's a nice property. And really, one of the things that I think that we can bring to the table that people need to understand is which structure, how does tax work, and ultimately that only then ties into the right property, in terms of, and I'm sorry to beleaguer that point, but it's very important for people to understand how important contextually that is to all fitting together and to getting long-term success.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the buying is just the beginning. I mean, it's, buying a property, obviously you have to do the research ahead of time, but then part of the research ahead of time is how are you going to manage it after you buy it? And if it involves construction, if it involves other, country-specific regulations, the fact that you guys have that experience is invaluable to the people who will end up using your platform.
Well, anyone who's online tonight, if you go to propertygoingglobal.com, we've made it available tonight, especially that anyone can actually go and they can fill in their name and they'll get it for free. So the book, propertygoingglobal.com, and then it's just a value add for you, Manolis, and for all your clients online tonight, because we run through a lot of the stuff I've just spoken about, and they can actually get country specific as well.
Excellent. So thank you so much for that. So you viewers, make sure you go to propertygoingglobal.com. I will also paste that URL in the event page after the event. So going to actually the mechanics of how it works through Wealth Migrate, do you want to give us a very an overview of essentially the steps someone would take from registration to ultimately investing? How does it work through Wealth Migrate if somebody who is an accredited investor wanted to invest today? And Scott, would you like to go through that?
Perfect. Look, in simple terms, what we've tried to do is that we're all investors, and really we built the business originally, the IPS business, on Zig Ziglar's principle, where you can have anything you want in life if you help enough other people get what they want. So, what we did is we decided that we were going to build the business on 3 points. The first one was trust, the second one was transparency, and the third one was our interests needed to be aligned. So no different to Manolis, you, me, and Dr. Dolf de Roos buying a property together. I would like to trust the two of you. I'd like to have transparency as to who's making what, during the deal and the numbers. And ultimately, I'd like all our interests to be aligned. Manolis, I wouldn't like you to make all the money up front and I take all the risk. And if we make a bit of profit on the back end, you take 60% of the upside. Now, just as a matter of interest, I'm reading Tony Robbins' book, Money Masters, or Master Money, and I'd highly recommend people read it. It's in all your bookstores at the moment. I mean, just this morning, I got the stats. 90% of all Americans invest in mutual funds, which is worth $13 trillion. And people put 100% of the capital in, they take 100% of the risk, and yet the fund managers take 60% of the upside, if there's any upside, and if there's no upside, they still get paid their fees. Now, people sit there and they think, well, that no one would do that. That's ridiculous. And they actually asked them, they said, well, why do people do it? And they said, because of the marketing. Well, property is no different. Syndications and the funds, people's interest online. So in simple terms, ours is based on those 3 values, and then there's 4 steps. The first step is that they need to go and register. They need to sign up, and they need to prove their accreditation. Now, if you're in America, you've got to prove that you're an accredited investor. If you're overseas, there's different regulations per different countries. And we've pretty much got that figured out for the major countries like South Africa, Singapore, Australia, the UK, and a number of Hong Kong, and another number of other places that we're working on at the moment. Then what you do is once you've registered, you've got to put down what it is you're looking for. So you and me might be different, Manolis. You might be only wanting very safe product. You want to protect your capital, wealth preservation. And I might be a high roller. I want risk. I want to go after developments, whereas you want to go after existing buildings. The more accurate one qualifies oneself, the more accurate one will get access to the right type of opportunities. The third thing is that you can do the entire transaction online. So we can help you set up an LLC. At the moment, we still are having a couple of technicalities with the IT and I don't know who sets up the LLCs in America. Maybe Dolf, you can help as well. But anyway, the government institution, we're battling to do that online at the moment with the links, so there is a bit of human interaction there. But with time, we want that to be seamless. But bottom line is you can set up your LLC, you can fund your account, you can go in and literally test the water with different projects, because there's certain genres, certain verticals, which we'll talk a little bit more about later, but like medical buildings, residential buildings, industrial opportunities, where people can say, yep, I'm interested in that. And then ultimately, when they find a project they like, because they've already funded their account, they can fund the project. Everything's digital. They can do all the DigiSign and everything online. And ultimately, they then own, if I put in 10% of the cash, I own 10% of the property. So again, we're not a blended fund of funds. We direct property ownership. Whatever that property is, you will own 10% of it. And then the fourth step is the dashboards. And you get to manage your property and ultimately your portfolio through one dashboard. And that's what really excites me, because I've got properties on 4 continents, and I'm not very good with admin. I certainly don't like lots of emails and management agents sending me stuff, because I keep forgetting to pay my rates and taxes and all the admin stuff I hate. And I really look forward to the day, and we're not there yet, but the dream is where it's all integrated off my cell phone. I'm literally sitting there. I can sit here in Bali and manage my entire portfolio in one place. And that's the dream. That's where we're going. But it's a combination. So those are the 4 steps that people would take. But I think the most important thing, you mentioned it earlier, but the step that really we differentiate ourselves on, and why Dr. de Roos is so important, is that education is actually the most important step. You need to educate yourself so that you're making educated and informed decisions. Because once you've got the right education and the right knowledge, then you can make the right decisions. This is not a gambling system or taking a punt on buildings. We want people that understand what they're doing, they understand why they want to do it, and then ultimately we can help them find the right solutions.
Absolutely, and education is a big part of it. And correct me if I'm wrong, Dolf. The people who will be able to bring projects onto the Wealth Migrate platform also have to go through a series of due diligence steps that you and your team would go through to ensure that indeed it is a quality asset. So not only will the investor have the protection of their own self-education, but I believe initially your platform is also doing due diligence to ensure that you're not putting a property that is not a good deal on your platform. Is that correct, Dolf?
And that is correct, especially in the initial phases. But the aim, of course, is that it becomes seamless. And to use a very loose analogy, if you look at eBay, when they first started, in the first few days, they may have vetted some of the sellers there to make sure that the products they were selling were real and that they actually delivered them. But I think it would be foolish to think or to expect eBay to vet every product sold or put on the platform. It's a self-regulating thing, because if a seller doesn't deliver, or what he advertises and has photos of is not an accurate representation of what he's actually trying to move, then the feedback will come through and they say, this guy never delivered, or he sold me a Rolls Royce, but it was a Trabant or something like that. And the same will happen on these platforms, which is, by the way, another extreme example of how much of an advantage they are over the conventional way of selling it. When you have a developer selling his own product, or a real estate agent who's engaged by the seller to sell a building, you can almost forgive them for trying to put the property in as good a light as possible and using flowery language. Home handyman can do wonders is a known euphemism for it needs a lot of work. So it's going to be self-regulating, because as people come back and sell more and more products, the buyers will be able to say, oh yes, I bought from them before, or my neighbor did, or I know of someone who did, or I don't know this person at all, but he's got more than 1,000 pieces of feedback there saying how good the deal was, and he predicted he'd get 12%, but he averaged 14%, whatever that feedback might be. So you're absolutely right, Manolis. In the initial stages, we do a lot of the vetting. We do some of our own due diligence on the developers or proponents of a property, and then on the property itself. But we believe that with time, the need for this will go down as the market, in fact, takes up that role, which, again, I'll just add, is one of the massive advantages of crowdfunding over conventional ways of selling real estate.
Absolutely. I mean, and with technology as well, there'll be some certain automated underwriting mechanisms as well. So I look forward to that day.
But I think also, sorry, just to butt in there, guys, but it's very, very important. You know, what Dr. Dolf de Roos said is very much the exciting part of where the future's going. But while we still remain in the present, we use our, well, over 30 years worth of experience between the guys, and I'm the youngest, by the way, by quite a long way. When you look at Dr. Dolf de Roos and Henny Besaidnout, our chairman, as they alluded to already, they've been doing this 3 decades, and over 3 decades they've built up some very sophisticated tools to help analyze whether a deal is a good deal or not. Some of them are not as scientific, where, as an example, deciding if a partner is a good partner or not is more based on experience than it is actually based on some scientific algorithm. Although you'd be surprised, we've got some pretty interesting algorithms we do actually use to decide. And we call that our GID system, our Global Investment Due Diligence System. And it's got 10 different paradigms that ultimately form a total algorithm as to whether we do deals or we don't do deals. And very often, at the moment certainly, we also tend to participate in our own deals. And I think one of the things that, to give people a metaphor or analogy, it's a bit like Saks or Harrods. They don't necessarily sell all their own products, but anything that's in a Saks or a Harrods, you can kind of know that it's going to be good quality because they only buy from the best. And our attitude is that we don't want to be a flea market where there's thousands of different products to start off with, because quality and safety are our 2 most important metrics, and we'd rather have less opportunities but be very secure in what is in the store than have too many opportunities and know that our systems artificially are not strong enough yet to make sure that everyone is safe and secure. Now, obviously, we don't have a crystal ball any better than the future. We can't guarantee anything in the future like anyone else. But I think we can safely say that generally, like Warren Buffett said in the audio book I was listening to this morning, he took on a mutual fund manager and he bet them $1 million that they could not outbeat him over a 10-year period. And he was up 46% and they were up 14% after 5 years. And it's quite simple, guys. At the end of the day, I'm 37. I've got 16 years worth of experience in international real estate. But, I'm only half the way to Dr. Dolf de Roos or Henny Besaidnout and many of the other people that we bring in. And experience counts for everything. So, I think it's the best way to really focus on safety in the long term and to be able to ride the market up and down.
Absolutely. That is the key. The experience, it's not just a technology. It is the experience which really provides the safety and security. And actually, we do have our first question from the audience. This is from Frikkie van Schalkwijk, and excuse me, Frikkie, if I pronounce your name wrong.
Frikkie van Schalkwijk, dude.
Frikkie van Schalkwijk, yes. He asks, who maintains these properties? Who would like to answer that question? Who maintains the properties once they're purchased?
Scott, you go on that one.
Yeah, so that comes back to what I was talking about with partnering. So we're not arrogant or stupid enough to think that we can go into every country and do everything ourselves. So basically, we don't do everything ourselves in any country. But on the ground, we do have partners. We've got a special model, or again, an algorithm that we have where we decide between who we partner with and who we don't. One of the philosophies is that they have to put their money in the deal as well, so that they are equally tied to the results of the deal. And then we need to have a full solution. So management, maintenance, accounting, reporting, and feeding it all back through. I mean, as an example, one of our medical portfolios, you know, the guys, we've just got to the end of the first quarter. They've given us all the financials. We're thoroughly reviewing all the financials, and then we'll upload that information into the portal and feed that information back to the investors. But the bottom line with international investing, Manolis, is that unless you've got partners on the ground, you cannot succeed. And I often say to people, the quality of our success is only based on the quality of the partners on the ground. And really the value that Dr. Dolf de Roos, myself, the Wealth Migrate platform, and the rest of our partners is actually being able to find the quality partners in the right markets. That's the value add we bring to the table.
Absolutely. So great question, Frikkie. Thank you very much for that. I'd actually like to move into the next segment, which is really talking about real estate in general. Dolf, you travel the world and you're very knowledgeable about real estate. What do you see as the top global real estate trends at the moment? What is hot in real estate at the moment?
Many things are. You know, the world is constantly evolving. The sale of items, goods and services over the internet is gaining momentum. The statistics are astounding. And so one would have thought, or I certainly would have thought, that the demand for retail space would be going down. We haven't seen that happen yet. Certainly the volume of goods sold through physical stores has diminished dramatically, but the number of stores there does not seem to be abating. I think the biggest trend, and it sounds self-serving, but I'm speaking from the heart here, not the head, the biggest trend is the trend of going global. I think slowly people are starting to realize the merits of being in a global world. Here in the States, it's often, you know, tempting when you live in one country to see the world from the perspective of that country. Even here in the States, though, they're starting to realize that we have to go global. The government here is promoting it. I personally believe that this decade, the next 10 years, will be the decade that the world finally gets it. And even in other countries where it's more normal to go global, where people are more familiar with foreign currencies and travel and passports and all that sort of thing, it's not yet mainstream. I think that's going to happen very much along the analogy that I spoke of before with the EU, but it happened even in the United States. We tend not to think what the meaning of the words United States is, but these are states that were autonomous and independent. They had their own legislations, their own police forces, their own everything, and they decided to unite to become one country, a bit like the European Union. The trend is happening in other countries, and Australia and New Zealand for decades now. We've had CER, or closer economic relations. Some people even say that both countries would be better off if New Zealand became one state of Australia. Of course, in New Zealand, they think that Australia should become a state of New Zealand. But whether they do this or not from a legislative point of view, there are far more economic ties between countries. And it's a natural consequence, too, of, you know, 100 years ago, people tended to live their lives in one country, and you certainly wouldn't marry someone from another country. That was very rare. Whereas now we've got people traveling more, we've got people marrying more, they have got kids who are half, you know, Burmese and half Austrian and things like that. So the world is getting used to the concept. The world is also shrinking. I mean, let's just take 10 seconds out and think of how incredible this is that we're on a video conference from Indonesia and the west coast of the United States and the east coast of the United States, and we've got viewers, both live and recorded or delayed viewing, who can see this from anywhere in the world. This is something that in my lifetime we wouldn't have thought possible. I remember going to the Philips plant, Evoluon in the Netherlands, where they had a little black and white CRT TV and a phone, and someone would sit in the other room and you'd have this video conference, and they said one day this will be possible, and we thought, that's not going to be possible. The bandwidth isn't big enough. And now we have these smartphones. Everyone's got them. They sell $1 billion a year, where you can FaceTime and do Skype video calls. And we can. So, I mean, the world is changing, and the technology is enabling the world to go global. So the biggest trend in real estate is this trend of going global. We can now pick the eyes out of countries that have good returns, that have stable political environments, where business is on the move. And, you know, you see stats, and stats are just a group of numbers looking for an argument. For years, I was saying that Japan is facing some turbulent times because the population is shrinking. In fact, amongst the Western world, there are only 2 nations that face a dire shrinking of the population. One of them is Germany and one of them is Japan. Germany, it's ameliorated there because they import a lot of foreign workers, so the population is kind of keeping pace there. But in Japan, it is definitely shrinking. They fear that within one generation, it may shrink from its current about 127 million down to below 100 million. That's a tremendous reduction in people. It's just as a result of an extraordinarily low birth rate, and they have very few people that immigrate into Japan just through policies and attitudes and everything. I always thought that therefore real estate in Japan was doomed. And in some regards it is, in the sense of residential property. If there'll be 30 million fewer people within a generation, that's going to be a lot of vacant homes that don't need to be replaced. But even at the conference Scott and I were at recently in Hong Kong, it was revealed that despite the decreasing population, their GDP is still expanding. Their productivity per capita is still going up at one of the highest rates in the world. In other words, the decline of the economy that one could expect from a decreasing population is being more than compensated for by increased productivity. So even in Japan, there are prospects that things will go really well there. But people are becoming more aware of this because we have the ability now to read about it and to hear about it. And sure, we did 30 years ago too. You could watch a TV program and see a report on Japan, but you had to wait for that report on Japan to appear on your TV screen. Now we have apps where you can filter what you read, and if you want to read about Japan or read about new emerging markets, you just tap that into your search criteria and up it pops. Travel has become cheaper, not just it's not cheaper in absolute terms, but as a proportion of a person's salary. The cost of going somewhere has plummeted. In 1960, when jet travel was still in its infancy, the cost of going from, say, the United Kingdom down under to Australia or Indonesia was something like 8 months average salary, and now it's down to about 8 days of an average salary. So it's easier for people to travel. So to go and look at a property investment or to go on an exploratory investment tour has become easier. And I've of course helped this trend in that for decades now, I've been helping investors from one part of the world go to another. For instance, we'd do a speaking tour of Australia and talk about the merits of investing in another part of the world when the Australian dollar was extraordinarily high and the US dollar as low as it had been in 12 years. We went to Australia and encouraged people to come here, and we took them over by the plane load and showed them opportunities. And conversely, when the economic situations in those two countries was different, when the US dollar was high and the Australian dollar was low, we took Australians down there. And you might say, Dolf, are you trying to get it both ways? And the answer is yes, and we did, because they were good investments from both perspectives. And anyone on either of those trips, Americans going to Australia or Australians coming to America who invested back then, are still doing well, especially if they managed to keep the properties that they bought at that stage. But it was very much a trend that was unheard of a decade ago. And 5 years ago, it was heard of by a few. And now it's becoming quite normal. Just like now, when you buy something on eBay, it doesn't really matter whether the seller is in the same city as you or the same state or even the same country. I buy things from overseas. The only perceivable difference that I can discern when my eBay seller is overseas relative to in the same city that I'm in is that the shipping time takes a bit longer. But the payment method is the same. I use PayPal. I don't have to deal with foreign currencies. It turns up in my account, in my case in US dollars. And then it might take 6 days to come from China instead of 2 days to come from across the state or 3 days to come from the East Coast. There's no perceptible difference. So I think that's the biggest change. The other thing that Scott alluded to that I think is a really beneficial change is people are becoming smarter. And you notice it in many ways. The world is becoming more evolved. When I look at what my 13-year-old child is learning in mathematics at school, oh my gosh, that's way advanced of what I was learning at the age of 13. And it's better that it's more advanced. We have more tools, more resources. Things are going at a faster pace. We sometimes lament the speed at which the world is evolving, but whether we like it or not, it's happening. So we have more tools available at our disposal. Just even looking at some of those websites, this is not a backhanded promotion of them, but there's Trulia and Zillow and all these things. And for all the complaints one has and hears about these sites and how they were inaccurate by 20% here or they were 6 months out of date there, we all tend to use them because now you can drive down a street and you can see that there's a for sale sign, and you tap your screen a few times, you can get all the sales history going back in time. I mean, these are tremendous tools that we didn't have available. So I got called by a colleague a little while ago, and she wanted me to travel to Florida to look at a warehouse that she was thinking of buying. And I said, okay, well, for me to fly to Florida is about 5 hours. I've got an hour for security, and I have to be at the airport an hour beforehand, and it's going to take us an hour to get there. It's an 8-hour journey just from my home to get to this building. Then we need time to inspect it, and we need to fly. It's a 2-day trip. I said, have you looked at the building on Google Earth? And she said, would that be okay? I said, well, we can start. If we can eliminate the building as not being a good deal by going on to Google, then let's start with that. So we got on a call, not too dissimilar from this. We hooked up together with our computers and then went and had a look. And we could inspect it from an aerial point of view. We could drive all around it. The building occupied an entire block, so we could see it from every angle. You can go onto all these websites to see the price history. I mean, whether the building is in Florida or Peru or Ecuador or anywhere, well, I don't know if they've got quite that detail on all those countries, but we have so many more tools at our disposal. It's becoming easier and easier, and I think people are getting excited by that, and they'll embrace it. Now, will they have the ability to do it on their own? Absolutely, and some will, and more power to them. But for most of us, we want to be guided by those with the experience. I mean, if I am going to get heart surgery done, I don't want to go to a tree doctor. He's had a lot of experience with limbs and veins, or whatever they're called in trees, you know, those sap roots. But I want to have my heart surgery, if ever, spare the thought I should need some, by someone who's got experience in that. And in a similar vein, for people wanting to invest in real estate, I think they'll want a team with experience and with knowledge and with contacts on the ground, with managers and appraisers and all that we can trust and that we've used before. So I know that's a long-winded answer to your question, but they are the trends that I think are going to revolutionize investing around the world. And it's going to weed out the poor performers. As word gets out that these mutual fund managers have a lower performance history than some of the better investors, and that they take more in fees, people are going to think, why did we do this for generations?
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. I mean, so to summarize what you said, I mean, you have the global trends, you have the technology that is taking the global world to a local basis. I want to give Scott a chance as well. Scott, what do you see as the opportunities in real estate globally?
Just firstly, I'm not sure if I should even share this, Manolis. It's such a tip for people that, you know, Dr. De Roos is probably be upset with me. But so we were at MIPIM Asia, which is the biggest property event in Asia, and in simple terms, last year 15 million Chinese people invested overseas, internationally. That's more people than all adults in Australia put together. And it's expected to grow about 20% a year on year for the next decade. So it just backs up what Dr. De Roos is talking about, with literally millions of people investing. Where we come from in South Africa, lots of people are looking to buy assets overseas for wealth preservation. But I think also, can I share my screen? How do I share my screen with you so that you can see my documents? What have I got to do? Sorry, I normally use GoToWebinar, so I'm not 100% sure I'll do the hang on.
No problem. If you scroll to the left-hand side of your screen, you should see this green button that says Screen Share.
Yeah.
And when you click on that, just click on the first option that says Share Entire Screen. And then now we see it.
Okay. So this DLA Piper 12th Global Real Estate Summit, it's one of the most respected surveys that comes out annually. They take into account all the major trends. I'm not going to bore you with all the details. But the most important sectors are the healthcare assets, such as hospitals, medical office buildings, assisted living facilities, represents the most attractive investment class this year. The multifamily and industrial space sectors complete the top three. So just to confirm, it's basically medical, which is hospitals, medical office buildings, and assisted living care. And then number two, it is multifamily, and number three, it's industrial space sectors. And it's very interesting. At MIPIM, which is in France, in Cannes, it's the biggest property event in the entire world. And what they this year in March, they actually had they had medical at number one, and they had specific residential markets and aged care at number two. I don't know how you get back to my face, but anyway.
You're back.
There we are. But it was fascinating that that was then backed up again at MIPIM Asia, plus it's backed up by the DLA Piper report. And so, different countries are specific, but I think really in simple terms, there are big macro trends around the world of certain sectors that are going to be a lot more economically resilient and a lot better performing over the long term, because you've got an aging middle class, you've got you've got the baby boomers that want to get access to medical, you've got in Australia and America and England, you've got people that want more aged care facilities, which is why that demand is increasing dramatically. And then obviously, the other two sectors, as I discussed. And one of the things that we like to look at is not just, where can we invest on the world? That's the reason we got that book, The Property Going Global, and also our global property system, which is we want to look at a country, then we want to look at a macro vertical, then we ultimately bring it down to a state or a city, and then ultimately we look for our partners. And it's a very much a funnel effect to get to where we get to. And that's why I come back to that Harrods concept. You need to understand what's happening in the macro trends so that you can take advantage of them.
Absolutely, and and that brings us to our next question. We have a question from Giselle Waters, and she's asking, why is medical a hot segment right now? Why do you think medical is a hot segment?
Oh, I can take it. Scott touched on it already. The population around the world is graying, as we all know, meaning the proportion.
Scott, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still there, mate.
Okay, looks like Dolf got kicked off. Apologize for that.
Okay, well, let me answer the question, because to be fair, I had a very interesting experience. So our chairman, Henny Besaidnout, has been doing medical since 1992, and I was actually in Bondi Beach. Can you hear me clearly there, Manolis?
Yep, we can hear you clearly.
So I was actually in Bondi Beach in Sydney, Australia, and we were over there looking at buying some medical buildings with his expertise. It was in 2010 actually. And I said to him, Henny, why do you invest in hospitals? It's not a kind of a common sense thing, And when he told me, it was so obvious. I couldn't believe that everyone didn't know it. Because if you think about it, doctors never move. So no matter what happens, the old lady gets used to coming to the same building. Secondly, just as an example, the portfolio we just bought in Atlanta, our licenses stay with the building, not with the doctor. So like we've got radiography licenses, and if the doctors leave, that's great for them, but the licenses stay with the building. And that's why we got 10-year leases on the building. So it becomes a lot more difficult for them to move premises. So that's the first one. The second one is that even if the economy goes up or down, people still need doctors. Right in the heart of the American crisis, if you needed to go to the doctor, Manolis, in February of 2009, you still went to the doctor. People always go to doctors. So it's a very economically resilient, investment. And I think the third one, which is important, and it's always hard to say a little bit, but doctors tend to love looking after people and are not necessarily financially minded. So if they are paying $100 a square foot, but down the road they could get it for $80 a square foot, well, that's not in their conscience. They're focusing on looking after people. So you tend to have premises that sign 5 to 10-year leases, often with blue chip companies, because it's becoming far more of a, rather than individual doctors, you're dealing with whole companies, and it's just a lot safer. And it's on the back of a macro trend where people are getting older and need more medical. So those are the major reasons. And I must admit, for me in 2010, when Henny told me that, the light bulbs went on. And then we looked at that facility in Bondi Beach, and it was about 30 million Australian dollars. And he asked me how much I wanted to put in. And when I told him I had about $100,000, he laughed at me. But now with crowdfunding, I was able to put $100,000 into one of the buildings that we invested in Atlanta. And that's the best part nowadays, is that you've got people like that. And in the past, Donald Trump was the only guy that got a call to be part of the deal. And now I get a call as well, which I think is fantastic.
That's wonderful, and Dolf, I'm glad to have you back, but we only have about 10 minutes left, so I'm going to give you the next question. we're all optimists here, and it is very obvious that we're optimistic about the global trends. But there are some uncertainties in the marketplace. So, Dolf, what are some of the uncertainties in real estate and global real estate, and how can people reduce their risk to these uncertainties? And I think that's going to be really important to show both sides. So, in your estimation, what are the uncertainties, and how do you reduce risk?
Well, I think some of the biggest uncertainties are political situations around the world. Without trying to single out particular countries, we've seen activity in parts of Northern Europe where there have been annexations of regions. That could spin out of control quite quickly. If they try and take some of the NATO countries, some of the Baltic states, I think that could escalate into a major world crisis. And even if it doesn't affect people directly in other countries, the perception is that, the whole world could go into a tailspin. If I remember the crisis that started in Thailand in 1997, and within 3 months it was in Argentina, and it went around the world from there, it took about 9 months, interestingly, about a human gestation period, for the effects of that to come around the world. The more recent global financial crisis was even faster than that. It took about 9 weeks to take hold. So there are many things that could upset it. Look at Ebola. I mean, they estimate somewhere between 7,000 and 9,000 people have died. But if that wasn't contained, if it was a more virulent strain of this bug, it could have escalated and gone out of control. That would have restricted travel. It would have restricted investment. So there are many things that could come up and really shake the confidence of the world or specific regions. The US is coming up against another budget crisis. They have to approve, if I understood it correctly, $1 trillion or something. They managed to pull it off the last few times. As just a mere person on the street, you don't know if it's all politicizing or not. But if they can't make the budget, what's going to happen to the economy? I mean, there are so many things that can cause a major disruption. If we remember what happened with 9/11, what if there's a similar thing? What if there's an attack on Hoover Dam or something? That's going to really affect things. But we have no control over that for now. I think singularly the best thing that any individual can do to insulate themselves a little bit from that, to make yourself immune from a major downturn in one area, is to do exactly what Wealth Migrate is promoting and what in fact is in its name, and that is to be a little bit diversified. Some financial planners will tell you that you need complete diversification, a few shares, a few stocks, a few commodities, a few precious metals, a few options contracts, a few futures contracts, and oh, by the way, a little bit of property, probably not more than your own home. And the reason, of course, I'm biased, but the reason why they don't promote much real estate investment is there's nothing in it for them. They don't get a commission from putting their clients into real estate, whereas they do get a hefty commission from putting their clients into all those other things. And I think if you're going to be so diversified, you might as well just get a futures contract on the economy and you'll be just as well off. I do believe we should be diversified, but within real estate, a little bit of residential, not too much, a little bit of commercial, a little bit of industrial, a little bit of hospitality, a little bit of old age care, hospitals, that sort of thing. And then we should be geographically diversified. Don't have all your holdings in your own city, especially if it's not a fast growth city. Have a few on the East Coast and on the West Coast and in the mid-states, and then some in Europe and some down under and some in the emerging markets in Asia. I think that's the best way of making sure that you won't be vulnerable to a collapse or a major downturn in any one region. Because if it's your region that has that downturn, even if it only lasts 10 years, that could be just the time when you need to tap into that capital. It's a state of mind more than anything else. If you can think globally, if you're open to the idea of getting on the internet and exploring some places, even if you're not quite ready to travel there yet, then I think financially you'll be better off than if you just stick to your own little village in your own country.
Absolutely, Dolf. Diversification is a big thing, and because we have about 5 minutes left, I do want to hit upon something that Scott is very passionate about, known as the wealth movement. And so, Scott, our last topic will be, what is the wealth movement? Can you kind of share with us your vision for the future and how your company, Wealth Migrate, and your team is taking the lead in that?
Very much so, Manolis. Just before I do want to mention one thing, because I think it's a big risk and I want people to be aware of it. There's a lot of talk at the moment of tier 1 cities, London, Sydney, New York. They've all grown by 20%. And I think people need to be very careful. You know, you don't have to be a rocket scientist. When the stock market's the highest it's ever been, there's kind of only one way it goes. And so people need to be very careful when they're buying at full value with very low yields and look for attractive investments. But really what the wealth movement is about is that most people don't know this, but 49% of the world's wealth is held in real estate. And yet only 12.9% of the entire global population has access to real estate. Now, it just came out in Davos this year, in March this year, that the number one threat facing this entire planet is the wealth gap. It's the biggest problem we've got on this planet. And it's only actually getting worse. Now, I'm not going to go into all the details of the top 1%. You all know the numbers. But the real reason is that most people don't have access to getting wealth through real estate. And what the beauty is with real estate crowdfunding is that you use the word democratize, but it's becoming more and more accessible to people. Whether it's just Americans in America will be able to take advantage of good access. But to be fair, it's not the first world that really is going to have the biggest impact. It's the emerging world. It's the billion people in China. It's the billion people in India. It's the billion people in Africa that have never had access to real estate, do not have access to the wealth effect, therefore have not gone to school, they haven't gone to university. Everything we're talking about is not something that they even understand. But when one thinks about, you know, Peter Diamandis and the way that they've just done the Global Learning X Prize, and go and look that up, I'd highly recommend it, and where they're going to take a kid in sub-Saharan Africa from no literacy to literacy in 18 months. And when you consider that by 2016 there's going to be 1 billion handsets on the continent of Africa, what will happen is that first will come literacy, and then will come this movement to the middle class where they want shoes, they want cars, and ultimately they want access to wealth. And the wealth movement is a movement around the world where we've got some pretty major players involved, and hopefully with time we can get every crowdfunding platform, whether they Kickstarter, Indiegogo, Fundrise, Realty Mogul, ourselves, because at the end of the day, we're all saying the same thing. Wealth should be accessible by everyone. Everyone should have the same opportunities. We shouldn't be held back by regulation and legislation. You know, I've never met a wealthy financial planner in my life, so why should he tell me where I should invest my money? Why can't I use common sense and social proofing? You know, I'm allowed to cross the street. I'm allowed to pick my own holidays on one of the travel websites. I can pick which taxi to go in an Uber. I can buy stuff on eBay. You know, why can't I start making the investments with as Dr. de Roos already alluded, with the power of social media? And you know, the example of TripAdvisor is a classic thing, and that's what the wealth movement's all about. And over the next decade, we believe it's going to have a massive impact. And in simple terms, by 2020, we want to impact 1 billion people for the better of this planet and give them access to the wealth effect through real estate.
That is incredible. You know, you mentioned it, 49% of the world's wealth is in real estate, but that's only concentrated in the select few. So that mission is going to resonate with a lot of people. It resonates with me. So I mean, you know, anything that we can do from our perspective to help you with that, we would love to do that. We have just time is up. We have one other question here, and Roxanne, I will answer that question privately. I actually don't know the answer to your initial question, so we'll talk privately. But another question from Giselle Waters: does Wealth Migrate have an ROI, return on investment definition per client, per product, per crowd, or per location? Managing one buyer's version of a return on investment is hard enough in one location. How does Wealth Migrate determine the whole geographic factors of how different ROIs might apply in different locations?
It's fascinating. Dolf, do you mind if I answer that question quickly?
No, go for it.
So in simple terms, you know, having done this personally on 4 continents, we actually developed the Global Wealth Index, which most people won't have heard of before, but it's exactly that. It's taking currency into account. But in simple terms, to answer, I think it was Josanne's question, we only at the moment invest in first world countries with first world assets and first world currencies, because wealth preservation is one of our targets. So Australia, America, and England are our 3 key focuses, and then South Africa, where we've obviously got a lot of experience as well. And so we don't hedge against currency. If you invest in the US dollar, you get a US dollar return with a US asset. We don't try and play currency games. So if a South African takes rands and invests in America, it's got nothing to do with currency. We give them a hurdle rate return. And in simple terms, in those three markets, depending on the product, we look at a hurdle rate of 8% to 11%, depending on the project, which means the investors get the first 8 to 11%, and we only participate with them in the upside after the investors made their return. So, I don't know, Manolis or Dolf, if I've answered that question, but that's really the essence behind what we do.
Absolutely. Dolf, did you want to jump in there, or?
Well, I mean, that is all, I agree with that. In different countries, there are different norms of evaluating a property. Some use the pre-tax cash-on-cash return. Some use after-tax but before depreciation. Some use after-tax and after depreciation. Some talk about a NOI. Some talk about an ROI. Some talk about an IRR. The point is they're all valid measures. You just have to know what you're measuring. It's just like you can't say this car has a certain miles per gallon rating or kilometers, liters per 100 kilometers. You can't think in those terms. You've got to say, well, is that for city driving or for highway driving? So it just depends how fine you want to go down to it. And that is where, if we give sufficient information, where we give many of these indicators, the investor will be in a powerful decision to say, oh, now we can compare this residential property in Bolivia with this commercial property in Hong Kong. It becomes a valid way of comparing them. But you have to know what units you're talking about and what your measuring techniques were. And that's the exciting thing. That's all going to be democratized. That's all going to be out in the open. It's going to be transparent, which is so much better than saying, oh, we're giving you returns of 20%. Based on what? Does that include the equity buildup or not? And what is your equity buildup prediction based on? So we just like to put it out in the open and make it transparent.
Excellent point there. Transparency is one of the big pushes of the crowdfunding movement. And so I will give each of you just a last word before we sign off and say goodbye to the audience. So Dolf, a last word from you.
Well, firstly, thanks for having us here. It's a real honor. Look, I think in 10 years' time, we're all going to look back and say, wow, we knew crowdfunding was coming. Just like when fax machines came out, it was inevitable that they would be used, and it was also inevitable that they'd be replaced by email attachments. So sometimes you just get a glimpse of the way the world is going. You know it's going to happen. The decision that each and everyone can make right now is, do we want to participate, or do we want to say in 10 years' time, I knew it was going to happen, but I didn't do anything about it? And we're all about doing something about it. We're living in the now with an eye to the future.
Absolutely, Dolf. Thank you so much for joining us as well. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Scott, would you like to give the audience the last word?
Yeah, I think Dolf sums it up there. And again, thanks to everyone who's online, and Manolis, thanks for your time. It's always a pleasure to share time with you. I love the passion, and I always love spending time with people that understand where this trend's going and enjoy it. So it's great. So thank you. But no, I think in simple terms, nature's told us kind of what we need to do, and for a long time we've gone away from nature's principles, and there's been this holistic movement back towards nature. And when you look at the birds flying in a flock, a bird flying in a flock of 25 birds can fly 70% further than a bird flying on its own. In the 20th century, we always used to try and fly on our own, and we burn ourselves out, and we get cancer, and we have bankruptcy after bankruptcy. When we could just copy nature and do it together. And equally so, the birds, when times are tough up in winter, in the northern hemisphere, they fly south. They go to a better environment. And when it gets good again, they migrate back, to the north. And, again, as investors, whether it's in the stock market or in real estate, traditionally we've stayed in one place, whether it's been a good or bad environment. So I would just say to people, really embrace technology and really, but still follow the principles of nature. And I'm really excited because I think crowdfunding per se, not just real estate, but crowdfunding per se, is going to be like the printing press. And just like the printing press of the 15 and 1600s literally democratized the middle and lower class, gave them knowledge, gave them access to literacy, and led to the Industrial Revolution and many other amazing things over the next 300 to 400 years. I believe that crowdfunding is going to democratize wealth, and that will leave us with a better planet for all. So that's what I'm excited about.
Well, Scott, you were right in 1998, so I'm going to hold that prediction to you 10 years from now. We'll check back on this interview, and it'll come true. So thank you both again for joining us. To the audience, without you, we wouldn't be able to put on these webinars, so we thank you so much for joining us. This has been another episode of Reality Crowd TV, and until next time, dream it, believe it, achieve it. Have a good night, everybody.
Thanks, guys. Cheers.